I moved into the apartment on a Thursday, which I've always considered an unlucky day, though I never believed in luck until that winter. The place was cheap for the neighborhood. Third floor of a building that had been renovated twice but still smelled of the original construction, damp wood. Old paint, something underneath both that I couldn't name. The landlord, a short man named Gerald, who wore the same gray vest every time I saw him, told me the previous tenant had relocated for work. He said it quickly, the way people say things they've rehearsed. And I didn't press him because the rent was $400 below market, and I was 3 months behind on everything. I signed the lease in his car because his office, he said, was being repainted. I should have noticed that. I didn't. The first night I slept on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. And I remember thinking the silence was unusual for a city building. No pipes, no neighbors, no street noise filtering through the glass. Just a flat, total quiet that I told myself was good insulation. I woke at 3:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone immediately with the absolute certainty that someone was standing in the hallway outside my bedroom door. Not a sound, not a shadow under the door, nothing I could point to. Just certainty, the kind that lives in the body before the mind catches up. I lay there for 11 minutes without moving. Nothing happened. I told myself it was the stress of the move, the unfamiliar ceiling. The way new places speak to you in the first nights while your nervous system is still mapping them. I was a rational person. I had a graduate degree. I did not believe in things I couldn't see. By the end of the first week, I had settled into a routine. I worked from home, translating technical documents, so I was in the apartment most of the day. I noticed small things. The temperature in the bathroom was always slightly lower than the rest of the apartment, even with the door open. Even in the afternoon when the heat came up through the radiators and turned every other room close and warm. I noticed that my cat, Mira, who had lived with me for 6 years and was by nature indifferent to everything, would not enter the hallway after dark. She would sit at the edge of the living room, exactly where the carpet met the hallway tile, and stare down the corridor toward the bedroom with her ears flat and her tail rigid. I checked for drafts. I checked the baseboards. I found nothing. The second incident, I call them incidents now. Though at the time I called them nothing, I actively called them nothing. I was aggressive about it. Happened on a Tuesday in the 3rd week. I was working at my desk, which faced the window, and I heard behind me what I can only describe as the sound of someone exhaling slowly. Not a voice, not a word, just breath released with a kind of deliberateness. Close enough that I felt the small hairs on the back of my neck respond before I consciously registered what I'd heard. I turned around. The room was empty. The door was closed. Myra was asleep on the couch, and she hadn't moved, which I decided meant there was nothing, because cats notice things. Later, I would remember that Myra had also refused to come down the hallway, and I would wonder why I had trusted her stillness then and not her vigilance before. I started sleeping with the light on. I told myself it was because the winter darkness came early, and I was working late, and it was simply more convenient. I bought a second lamp. I put it in the bedroom corner that I found myself not looking at, the corner near the closet. The corner that I had begun to approach only when I needed something from it, and only in the middle of the day. I am a precise person. I make lists. I keep records. I started writing down the things I noticed, not because I believed something was wrong, but because I thought if I documented them, I could find the pattern that would explain them. The temperature differentials, the times I woke, the way Myra behaved, the sounds. Writing them down did not explain them. It only made them accumulate. Gerald came to fix the kitchen faucet in the 5th week, and I asked him, casually, about the previous tenant. He tightened the fitting under the sink without looking at me and said she had been a quiet woman. Very clean, no trouble at all. I asked why she had left. He said again that she had relocated for work. I asked where. He came out from under the sink and looked at me for a moment and said he didn't recall. His eyes were fine. His expression was fine. Everything about him was fine, and I still felt, with no evidence I can defend, that he was answering a question different from the one I had asked. That night, I searched the address online. I found nothing specific. No news, no records, nothing that confirmed or denied anything. What I found was a forum thread, 3 years old, in which someone had listed this address among several others in the neighborhood under a post titled, "With the casual grammar of the internet, anyone else feel weird in their apartment?" The thread had 4 replies. The last reply, posted 8 months after the original, said only, "You get used to it, or you leave." The username had been deleted. The 6th week, I started hearing the door. My front door at night, a sound like the handle being tested from the outside. Not turned, not rattled, just pressure. The specific sound of resistance, of a mechanism meeting force and holding. I checked the locks. I added a chain. I put a rubber wedge under the door. I did not call the police because I had nothing to tell them. Only a sound that occurred between 2 and 4 in the morning and stopped before I could do anything about it. Mira began hiding during the day. I would find her in the back of the closet, behind a box, sitting in the dark in a way that looked less like rest and more like shelter. I started leaving the closet door open so I could see her. The thing that I returned to, that I cannot explain within any framework that I am willing to accept, happened on a night in the 7th week. I was awake, which was normal by then, sitting in the lit living room at midnight. And I heard from the bedroom, from behind the closed bedroom door, the sound of my own name. Spoken once, quietly, in a voice I did not recognize. And I want to be careful here because I am aware of what the brain does at night. What sleep deprivation does, what isolation does. And I had been alone for weeks, and I had been frightened for weeks, and I know all of that. But I also know what I heard. It was not a sound that had an alternate explanation I could live with. It was my name, spoken by someone in a room I then opened, and found empty, and in which the temperature was the same as the bathroom, the same cold that had no source, and the closet door was open, and Myra was gone from it. And I found her 20 minutes later, sitting on the kitchen counter, staring at nothing with her pupils fully dilated in the light. I called Gerald the next morning and told him I was breaking the lease. He said very little. He asked if something was wrong with the unit. I said no. He said he would need 30 days' notice per the contract. I said I understood. There was a pause before he said, quietly and almost gently, "Some people do better there than others." I did not ask him what he meant. I did not want the answer put into words, because words would make it real in a way I was not prepared for. I was packed and out in 9 days. I paid the penalty. I left the second lamp. I have not been back to that street. Mira slept across my legs the entire drive, which is something she had not done since she was a kitten. And I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on her, and I did not look in the rearview mirror until we were on the highway, a T. And when I finally did, there was nothing behind me, only dark road. And I understood for the first time in my life that the absence of a thing is not the same as its absence. I found the light switch exactly where I remembered it, on the left side of the doorframe, and I pressed it up before I stepped fully inside. Nothing happened. I assumed the bulb had burned out, which seemed reasonable given that no one had been in the house for 11 months. I used my phone flashlight and moved into the hallway. The house smelled like old wood and something else I could not identify at first. Something faintly metallic, the way a handful of coins smells when you hold them too long. My father had died in March, and I had been putting off the estate work since then because I did not want to be here. I was here now because the real estate attorney had stopped being patient with me. I had a weekend, a rental car, and 3 large cardboard boxes. And the plan was to take whatever I personally wanted and leave the rest for the clearance company. The house was a 2-story colonial on a rural road in Vermont, 14 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by white pines that my father had refused to cut back even as they pressed closer to the house each year. My mother had grown up here. She died when I was 4. I had no real memories of her in this space, only photographs of her standing in the kitchen with her hair pulled back. Smiling in the cautious way people smiled in photographs in the early 80s. I set my bag down at the foot of the stairs and started with the kitchen because it was the most practical room and I wanted to get the practical things done first. I filled half a box with items I recognized from childhood: a cast iron pan, a ceramic bread crock with a hairline crack down the side, a set of wooden spoons my father had bought at a county fair the summer I turned 8. I worked steadily, and I did not let myself feel much, which was the strategy I had developed over the past several months for dealing with anything related to my father. By 9 o'clock, I had moved into the living room, and by 10, I was tired enough to stop. I had not eaten since the airport, so I drove 14 miles to a gas station and bought a sandwich and a bottle of water and drove back. The pines were very dark on either side of the road, and my headlights caught their trunks in a way that made them look briefly like figures standing very still. I parked in the gravel drive and sat in the car for longer than I needed to before I went inside. I slept in my old bedroom on a sleeping bag I had brought because the sheets in the house had been in storage for almost a year, and I did not want to deal with them. The room was small, and the ceiling had a water stain near the window that had been there since I was a teenager. I do not remember falling asleep, but I woke up at some point in the early morning with the absolute certainty that someone was standing in the hallway outside my door. I lay still and listened. There was nothing. I told myself there was nothing, and I made myself believe it, and I went back to sleep. In the morning, I started on my father's study, which was the room I had been avoiding. It was a small room off the back of the house with one window that faced the tree line. And my father had spent most of his waking hours there in the last decade of his life. He had been a retired engineer with an orderly mind, and the study reflected that. Books arranged by subject, files in labeled folders, a desk that held only what was currently being used. What he had been using at the time of his death, according to the surface of the desk, was a legal pad covered in handwriting and a manila folder thick with printed documents. I looked at the legal pad first. The handwriting was my father's, but it looked different from how I remembered it. Tighter and more pressured, the letters leaning forward as if they were being pushed. The pad was dated across several weeks from the previous autumn, and the entries read like a log. October 9th. Heard it again at 2 a.m., directly above the bedroom. Moved the same way it moved last week. I turned the page. October 14th, set the camera up tonight. October 17th, camera picked up nothing. But I heard it. I sat down in my father's chair. I did not know what I was reading. My father was not a man given to imagination or anxiety. He had the temperament of someone who believed that all phenomena had explanations, and that the explanations were usually uninteresting. I turned more pages. November 3rd, called the exterminator. He found nothing in the attic. Said the insulation was undisturbed. I paid him anyway. November 11th, it does not move like an animal. November 19th, I have started sleeping downstairs. The last entry on the pad was dated December 28th, and it read, "Only. I think it knows I can hear it." I put the pad down and looked at the manila folder. Inside were printed pages that I recognized as forum posts. Discussions from some online community I did not know. The headers stripped away so I could not identify the site. My father had highlighted certain passages in yellow marker. One paragraph read, The sensation of presence is the most commonly reported phenomenon and the most commonly dismissed. The brain generates presence detection as a survival mechanism, and under certain conditions of stress, sleep deprivation, or isolation, it generates false positives. This is the neurological explanation. It is a satisfying explanation. It does not account for the cases in which multiple unconnected individuals in the same location report the same experience. I closed the folder. I sat with my hands flat on the desk, and I looked at the window and the dark line of pines beyond it. My father had lived alone in this house for 7 years after his retirement. I had visited twice. I had told myself that I stayed away because we were not close, which was true. But I understood now that I had also stayed away because I had not wanted to see what time and isolation were doing to him. I had explained it to myself as respecting his privacy. I went upstairs. The attic access was a hatch in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, the kind with a folding ladder built into it. I pulled the cord, and the ladder came down, and I climbed up with my phone in my hand. The attic was low and insulated, and it smelled like fiberglass and old cardboard. I moved the phone light slowly across the space. Insulation, boxes of Christmas decorations, the frame of a crib that must have been mine, old suitcases. Nothing disturbed. No nests, no droppings, no sign of any animal. I was about to climb back down when I noticed the insulation near the far end of the attic. In one area, roughly 2 meters long and perhaps a meter wide, the insulation was flattened in a way that was distinctly different from the surrounding material. Not torn or scattered, compressed as if by a weight distributed carefully and deliberately, lying down. I did not move for several seconds. Then I climbed back down the ladder and pushed it back up into the ceiling. I stood in the hallway, and I became aware that my breathing had changed. I told myself there were explanations. I went back to the study, and I sat in my father's chair, and I did not touch anything for a long time. At some point, I realized that the metallic smell I had noticed when I first arrived was stronger in this room than anywhere else. I noticed it because I had stopped noticing it elsewhere. I opened the desk drawers one at a time. The bottom left drawer was locked, which I had not expected, and I felt something shift in my chest when I found it locked. I found the key in a ceramic dish on the shelf above the desk, where my father kept small items, coins, a spare watch battery, a folded receipt. The drawer held a voice recorder, the small handheld kind journalists used to use, and a stack of index cards held together with a rubber band. I turned on the recorder. There was a time stamp on the display, and the battery was nearly dead, which meant the recorder had been sitting in the drawer running continuously for a very long time. I pressed play. For the first 40 seconds, there was silence with a low hiss of a recording in a quiet room. Then there was a sound from directly above, from the attic, above the study, and I stopped breathing. It was not a scratching sound. It was not the sound an animal makes. It was slow and deliberate, and it moved in one direction and then stopped, and then came back, and then stopped again. It was the sound of something pacing. I pressed stop. I looked at the index cards. The first one read, "If you are reading this, it is still here." I looked at the ceiling. I sat very still, and I listened, and for a long time, there was nothing. And then from directly above me, in the space I had walked through 20 minutes ago and found empty, there was a single slow step. I found the maintenance log in the third drawer of the filing cabinet, tucked beneath a water-damaged clipboard and a box of rubber bands that had fused together from years of heat. The log was spiral-bound, the kind sold at drugstores for $2. And the cover had been written on in blue marker, Unit 4C notes. I was new to the building superintendent job. 3 weeks in, still learning which pipes groaned in winter and which tenants paid late. The previous super, a man named Gerald Foss, had left without notice. The property manager told me Gerald had a family situation. She said it the way people say things they don't want to explain. I took the log home that evening and read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before. I finished the first dozen pages. Gerald's handwriting was careful in the beginning, almost architectural. He documented every repair in Unit 4C with dates and times and the name of whatever contractor had been brought in. New garbage disposal, October 3rd. Grout resealed in master bath. October 17th replaced kitchen faucet cartridge. November 2nd. These were normal entries, the kind I was making myself in my own log for the other units. Then in November, the entries started changing. Not in content, but in pressure. The letters were the same shape, but pressed harder into the paper, the pen dragging rather than gliding. November 14th, tenant in 4C called again about the smell. Checked crawlspace access in hall closet. Nothing. Smell is there, but I can't locate source. Told her I'd follow up. November 19th, brought in Rodriguez from the plumbing company. He checked the drain stack. Said everything was normal. Tenant was not satisfied. I understand. Smell is bad, like copper and something else I can't name. November 23rd, checked the unit myself while tenant was at work. She gave me permission. Spent 2 hours. Could not find origin of smell. It seems stronger near the east wall of the bedroom. Removed outlet cover. Nothing behind it. Smell was very strong with the cover off. I replaced it. I had been in for C twice since starting the job. The tenant, a woman named Carla Messing, was in her mid-40s and worked in hospital administration. She was precise and composed and the kind of person who wrote follow-up emails. She had mentioned a smell once, in passing, and I had added it to my list. Reading Gerald's log made me move it higher. November 29th. Carla called at 11 p.m. She was not hysterical, but she was not herself. Said she heard something inside the east wall. A sound like settling. I told her old building settle. She said this was not that. I went over. I stood in the bedroom for 20 minutes. I heard nothing. She stood in the doorway, watching me. The smell was very bad that night, like the back of a refrigerator that has been unplugged for months, but under that, something sharper. I left without answers. I told her I would get someone to open the wall. I wrote the estimate request the next morning. December 4th. Building management denied the wall opening. Said there was no structural justification. I pushed back. They said document the smell with a third-party environmental firm first. I made the call. Earliest appointment is December 19th. The log skipped 2 weeks then. The next entry was December 18th, the day before the environmental appointment. Gerald's handwriting had changed more dramatically here. The letters were large and inconsistent. Some words pressed so hard the paper had torn slightly at the downstrokes. December 18th, I went into 4C tonight without Carla's knowledge. I know that was wrong. I want to explain why, but I don't think I can in a way that makes sense. I had been dreaming about the unit. In the dreams, I am standing in the bedroom and the east wall is breathing. That is the only word. Breathing. I went in at 2 a.m. with my master key. The smell hit me in the doorway. Carla was asleep. I could hear her. I stood in the bedroom in the dark. I did not turn on a light. I don't know why. I stood there for what felt like a long time. I put my hand flat against the east wall. The plaster was warm, not like a pipe runs behind it. Warm like skin. I left. I don't know what to do. The environmental appointment is tomorrow. December 19th. The firm came. 2 technicians. They spent 4 hours. Their report found no mold, no gas, no biological contamination. Air quality, normal. They smelled the smell. One of them said it reminded him of a slaughterhouse, but he could not explain it from a technical standpoint. No readings to support it. They left. Carla looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything that meant anything. December 22nd, I opened the wall myself. I told building management I had identified a structural concern and needed immediate access. I did not tell Carla I was coming. I brought my own tools. I cut a 2-foot section of drywall from the east wall at shoulder height. What was behind it was standard insulation bats, wiring, plumbing chase for the unit above. And one other thing, tucked between the insulation and the interior stud, pushed back so that it sat flush and invisible from either side, was a notebook. Composition style, black and white cover, the pages swollen with moisture. I took it. I patched the wall badly, a temporary job, and I left. I read the notebook in my car in the parking structure. I should describe what was in it, but I find I can't do that completely. It was a record, handwritten, spanning what appeared to be 11 months. The handwriting was not Gerald's. I do not know whose it was. The entries describe the unit in exhaustive detail, the sounds Carla made when she slept, the time she woke each morning, the precise shade of light through the bedroom curtains at different hours. They described the smell. The person who wrote the notebook described the smell as something they had made. They were proud of it. The later entries in the notebook became harder to read. Not because the handwriting deteriorated, but because the content described things that had no physical explanation for how they could have been observed from within a wall. And the last entry, undated, was 3 words. She doesn't know. Gerald's log ended there after a single final entry dated December 23rd. It said only, "I gave notice today. I can't go back in." I sat with both documents on my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Carla Messing. It was 9 p.m. She answered on the second ring, which told me something. I told her I had found something in the wall and that she needed to leave the unit tonight and stay somewhere else, and that I would explain everything in the morning. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had been waiting for someone to tell her that. She said she had her bag packed for a week. I heard her moving through the apartment. I heard a door open, and I heard her footsteps change in the way they do when someone walks from carpet to tile. Then, from tile to the concrete of the hallway. She was out. I told her to take the stairs, not the elevator, and to go directly to her car. She asked me why the stairs. I told her it was faster. The real reason was that I had reread the notebook that afternoon and found a passage I had skimmed the first time, a description of a mechanism, something Gerald and I had both used. I couldn't explain what the writer meant by mechanism. I didn't want to. Carla stayed at her sister's for 3 weeks while building management, fought with their insurance company and their lawyers and each other. I filed a police report. The detective who took my statement read the notebook in front of me at my kitchen table, without expression. When he finished, he put it in an evidence bag and told me these things were usually explicable. I said usually. He didn't answer that. Forensics found nothing in the wall cavity that should not have been there. No physical trace of occupancy, no DNA, no hair, no fibers. The notebook's paper dated to the same era as the building, 1967, but the ink was recent. Within the past 2 years, they could not explain that combination. The case was listed as open. Carla did not return to the unit. I am still in the building. I do the job. I fix what breaks. I write careful entries in my log, dates and times and contractor names. Last week I was doing routine checks in the basement and I found a second crawlspace access, one that does not appear on the building's mechanical drawings. It is in the northeast corner, behind the water softener unit, and it has been opened recently. I can tell because the paint around the frame is cracked in a fresh way and there are long scratches on the concrete floor in front of it. Parallel lines, as if something heavy was dragged out and then dragged back. I took photographs. I wrote the entry in my log. The smell was there too, faint, the way it must have been in the beginning for Gerald. before it became something he could not name. I know what it is now. I don't mean I have identified it chemically. I mean I recognize it. I have started to recognize other things too. Small things, a sound at certain hours, the particular quality of warmth on certain walls. I have not told the property manager. I have not told the detective. I am writing this instead, which I understand is not the same as doing something. I want to be precise about why I haven't acted yet. It is not fear exactly. It is that I have a question I cannot stop asking, the same question Carla must have asked every night. She lay in that bed, knowing something was wrong, and not yet knowing how wrong. It is the question that keeps me here past the point of sense, the same one that kept Gerald for 3 months before it broke him. I need to know if it is still in the building or if it was ever just in the wall.